Terry Dolowy was a 24-year-old woman living with her fiancé Russell Lee Jr. in a mobile home in rural La Crosse County, Wisconsin. Russell and Terry had been living together for the past 5 years. Terry was studying at the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, and was also working at a restaurant called Piggy's. On Valentine's Day in 1985, Terry was working late and her fiancé Russell had been waiting for her. She finally arrived home at around 1 a.m. Russell, who worked as a night auditor at the Radisson La Crosse Hotel, was supposed to start his shift at 11 p.m. However, as they only had one automobile, he had to wait for Terry to return so that he could use the car to get to work. Running already 2 hours late, he rushed out of the home, even though Terry wanted him to stay with her for a while. Russell recalled that Terry seemed tired and also irritable, explaining, quote, "She wanted me to spend some time with her, so she was a little depressed." This was the last time that Russell would see his fiancée alive. Terry had been under a lot of pressure recently, working around 20 to 25 hours a week, while also studying hard to graduate that spring. The couple also had financial worries, according to Russell himself. After arriving at work, Russell recalls that he grew concerned about Terry's state of mind and began trying to call her on 2 When she had continued to not answer, Russell left the Radisson Hotel 2 hours later and drove back to their mobile home. Russell arrived home at around 4 a.m. He found the door slightly open and the lights on. Terry and her poodle Susie were nowhere to be found, but mysteriously left behind were Terry's wallet, keys, and other personal items. Russell hoped that maybe Terry was out walking her dog, or that she'd met up with a friend. Despite his concern, and with their looming financial struggles on his mind, Russell went back to work. When he finally returned to the mobile home around 6 a.m., Terry was still missing. He contacted her family and the police. Investigators searched the trailer home but found no signs of foul play. For the next 4 days, the media ran Terry's story on all of the local news stations, asking anyone with information about Terry's whereabouts to come forward. However, little clues were gleaned from the investigation. Russell mentioned that the only other unusual that he could recall was the prowler that had attempted to break into their home the previous Sunday while he was present. He had called 911 and a squad car was sent to check the area that night, but nothing was found. Another clue came from a neighbor of Terry's, who informed police that he'd seen her leave in a car with a short man on the day she disappeared. While the neighbor wasn't completely certain of the exact date, he believed it was around the time of her disappearance. The man, estimated to be between 5'2" and 5'4", was said to be driving an older model 4-door car. However, it is unclear if anything came of this tip. On February 18, 4 days after Terry's disappearance, a man driving on Mohawk Valley Road noticed a glow reflecting off of a bridge sign, which caught his attention. He decided to take a closer look and discovered a burning body in the creek bed. He quickly called authorities from a nearby farmhouse. First responders could tell that the deceased body had not been there for long, and although the body had been decapitated, authorities were able to identify it as 24-year-old Terry based on the clothing that remained unburned. Fingerprint analysis later confirmed that the body was indeed Terry Dolowy's. Terry's fiancé Russell was the first person police looked at as a suspect. He had been the last person to see her and had unpaid debts of between $20,000 and $30,000, which police theorized may have been a motive for someone to murder Terry. Russell had refused to give police a list of names of people to whom he owed money, saying they could not possibly be involved because they were close friends. Police believe that the killer may have followed Terry home that night from Piggy's restaurant. After waiting for Russell to leave for work at the Radisson La Crosse Hotel, they theorized that the assailant may have entered the mobile home, convinced Terry to leave with him, and then kidnapped and murdered her. Authorities speculated that Terry had been held captive for 3 or 4 days before being murdered. Terry's head was never located, and neither was her dog. Police believe that she was probably decapitated and burned in an effort to prevent authorities from identifying her, but the body did not completely burn, and police were able to identify her by matching fingerprints. The autopsy report indicates that Terry was killed elsewhere and dumped at the culvert where she was found. For 40 years, the case would go cold, with over 500 people being interviewed, but no arrests made. The community of La Crosse was left with only fear and confusion then. In late September of 2024, Vernon County Sheriff's Office announced that Michael Raymond Popp, a 60-year-old truck driver from Tomah, had been charged with the murder of Terry. Authorities revealed that back in January of 2000, 23 DNA samples taken from Popp had matched material found in Terry's autopsy. Prosecutors say that Popp, who was 21 years old at the time of the murder, knew Terry personally. He had been a senior at the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, and had lived near Terry's mobile home. He initially told police that Terry was only a casual acquaintance, but when confronted with the DNA evidence, he claimed that they, quote, maybe had a little affair lasting 6 to 8 months. Popp told police that back in March of 1985, he and his girlfriend had attended pool tournaments with Terry and Russell, and were often paired as partners. The now 60-year-old truck driver denied killing the 24-year-old woman and told police that he is not a violent person and that he had no idea how his DNA would have gotten on Terry's body. When Popp's ex-girlfriend was interviewed by police in 1987, she was asked if he had the potential to commit Terry's murder. And she reportedly replied, quote, Mike is capable of doing something like this because he has a lot of different personalities. However, she said she didn't believe that he was involved. Popp's girlfriend had broken up with him in 1986 when she filed a court injunction against him for physical abuse. He was finally arrested for Terry's murder and is now being held in Berning County Jail. He faces life in prison if convicted. On the evening of March 22, 1993, Carmen Van Huss, a kind and empathetic 19-year-old, visited her ailing grandmother, who was convalescing in Community Hospital South in Indianapolis. The teen was accompanied by her father, James Penhouse Sr., and her youngest brother, who had just turned 3. After spending time with her elderly grandmother, whom she loved very much, Carmen gave her family a ride back to their Southside Indianapolis home, arriving around 9:30 p.m. Her father had asked Carmen to stay, but she said that she had to get home to wash her Pizza Hut uniform. She was currently waitressing for the casual restaurant chain. Carmen returned to her studio apartment, never to be seen alive again. At approximately 11:30 p.m., neighbors reported hearing Carmen and an unidentified male engaging in conversation and laughter as they entered her apartment. However, at around 1 a.m., they heard the sounds of a violent altercation coming from her residence. One neighbor said that they heard Carmen yell, quote, "Get off of me, get off of me." They also reported hearing hurried footsteps leaving the apartment. Shockingly, and to the later regret of many involved, no one called the police, however. Someone did complain to Complex Management, who left a handwritten note on Carmen's door, chiding her for the noise and telling her to be more considerate of her neighbors. The following day, Carmen failed to report for her shift at Pizza Hut. On March 24th, after multiple days of missed work, Pizza Hut managers were worried and looked up Carmen's emergency contact on her employment application, eventually reaching Carmen's father. Concerned, her father went to Carmen's apartment the next day, where he discovered a brutal and tragic scene. Carmen was laying on the floor naked. Her body had bled out from multiple stab wounds. There were signs of a struggle, including a knocked-over table, clothing thrown on the floor, and a large pool of blood near Carmen's head. There was also blood spatter around her body. Autopsy reports showed that Carmen had over 60 stab wounds to her head, face, and body. She was missing her left earring, which appeared to have been torn from her ear. It is believed that the weapons involved may have included a pocket knife and/or a screwdriver. DNA evidence was recovered from Carmen's body, and blood from a source other than Carmen was found on a paper bag inside of her apartment. Investigators believe the assault took place in the living room, with the suspect possibly going into the kitchen to wash himself. Afterwards, several people, including some of the ex-boyfriends of Carmen, were questioned, but there were no suspects at the time. Carmen's grandmother had tragically also just died, and the family could not afford a second funeral. So therefore, they were forced to fundraise in the community for contributions to help bury their daughter, and also for money to offer a reward for information about their daughter's killer. Over the years, detectives interviewed numerous individuals and pursued hundreds of leads, but the case ultimately grew cold. Captain Bill Carter of the Indianapolis Police Department began investigating the case himself almost a decade after it happened. In his spare time, he raised funds through GoFund for specialized DNA testing. He also established a Facebook group and a website titled Justice for Carmen Van Huss. In the year 2000, detectives requested to add Van Huss's DNA to state and national databases, but with no new hits. In 2013, using the evidence found on the bag in Carmen's apartment forensic, scientists were able to obtain a partial DNA profile of a male, but they were unable to find a match in the system. In 2018, the police submitted the suspect's DNA advanced testing, including genetic genealogy, and in 2023, a DNA analysis company contacted them with information that someone they described as an identified user was possibly related to a person of interest. In Carmen's murder case, this communication ultimately led to the identification of a suspect, Dana Jermaine Shepard, 52, of Columbia, Missouri. The 52-year-old man, who would have been 21 at the time, was working as a janitor at the University of Missouri when he was visited by Indianapolis Metropolitan Police detectives. Earlier this year, investigators wrote in an affidavit that Shepard was visibly shaking as he read their warrant for his DNA. Shepard was finally arrested in the fall of 2024 on 2 counts of murder and 1 count of with deadly force in addition. The Boone County Court charged him with being a fugitive from out of state. It is unknown how the company acquired Dana Shepard's DNA, as he was simply called a user, which made some in the media wonder if he had submitted to some sort of familial DNA website, although no further information is available. According to court records, Shepard used to live in the same apartment complex and remained living there even after the killing. After detectives arrested Shepard, he invoked his constitutional right to a lawyer without ever speaking to the police. Therefore, many details of the case remain unknown, such as whether Carmen had planned to meet with him in her apartment or had met him spontaneously. Shepard is now being held without bond at Missouri's Boone County Jail, and an extradition hearing is set to be held in the future. After more than 31 years of uncertainty, the case can finally be brought to court so that justice may be served. On June 11, 2000, Julie Ann Mcdonald, a pharmacist at Memorial Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee, was found dead in her home in Lafayette, Georgia, about 25 miles south of her work. A later autopsy report would indicate that the 42-year-old smart and studious woman had been deceased for 3 to 4 days prior to her body being discovered. Medical examiner reported that she had been stabbed several times before being left to die. At the time, authorities believed that Julie had known her killer due to the absence of any signs of a forced injury. The case was reassigned several times throughout the years before evidence was much more recently submitted for testing. Ultimately, it was this act which contributed to charges being filed against Clarence D. George. The now 63-year-old man, who was 39 at the time of Julie's brutal killing, was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals on August 22, 2024. Prior to his arrest, he had been watched and observed by the Marshals in his home in Jefferson County, Alabama. George had initially been identified as one of 4 or 5 suspects in the case. Special Agent in Charge Joe Montgomery of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations said that George surfaced to the top of the list, in part because he was found in neighboring Catoosa County with Julie's checkbook in his possession. Investigators say the pair were acquaintances, not expanding on such a label, except to comment that the two knew each other before the grisly murder. George is being charged with murder and aggravated assault. He remains in custody in Jefferson County, Alabama, where he's awaiting extradition to Walker County, Georgia, to face justice after evading it for nearly 25 years. Julie McDonald still has a niece and nephew alive, and they have since been made aware of the arrest. Special Agent Montgomery warned any still unidentified, yet guilty individuals who have previously taken the lives of others and are now living free that technology and police procedure will catch up to them eventually, saying, quote, "All you bad guys out there that done these murders and you haven't been brought to justice, we're coming. May not be today, may not be tomorrow, but we're coming."